Today, I am going to tell you a true story. A story so shocking that many people find it hard to believe after hearing it. It leaves people surprised, disturbed, and deeply worried that such things could happen in the real world. This is a story where wealth, power, and exploitation were deeply connected. A story that challenges what many people believe about justice and influence. For an ordinary person, it may sound impossible, like something from a dark movie or hidden history. But this is not fiction. This is a bitter reality that the world has had to face.
For decades, the Middle East has lived under the shadow of a conflict that many experts warned could one day explode into open war. Today, that fear appears closer to reality than ever before. Powerful airstrikes, missile launches, and rising tensions between global powers have placed the world on edge. Reports of attacks involving the United States and Israel targeting Iran have sparked intense debate across the globe. Governments, analysts, and ordinary people are all asking the same urgent questions. Why is this happening now? What pushed these nations toward direct confrontation? Is this a defensive action, a strategic move, or the beginning of something far more dangerous? Some believe the strikes are necessary to stop a future threat, while others argue they are acts of aggression that could ignite a much larger conflict. The stakes are incredibly high because this is not just a dispute between a few countries that involves nuclear concerns. Global alliances, oil markets, and the balance of power in one of the most sensitive regions on Earth. If the conflict escalates further, it could pull in other nations, disrupt global economies, and affect millions of lives far beyond the battlefield. In this video, we will go beyond the headlines to understand what is really happening. We will explore the reasons behind the confrontation, the long history of hostility between these countries, the arguments made by each side, and the possible consequences for the world. By the end, you will have a clearer picture of why this conflict has emerged and how long it might last. To understand why tensions between the United States, Israel, and Iran have reached such a dangerous point, we need to step back and look at the deeper historical roots of their relationship. Surprisingly, Iran and Israel were not always enemies. Before 1979, the two countries actually had quite a diplomatic and economic cooperation. However, everything changed after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. When Iran's new leadership came to power, it adopted a strongly anti-Israel position and began supporting groups that opposed Israel in the region. From that moment onward, hostility between the two nations steadily grew. At the same time, relations between Iran and the United States also deteriorated sharply, especially after the American embassy hostage crisis in Tehran. Over the following decades, mistrust turned into rivalry, and rivalry slowly evolved into open confrontation. One of the biggest sources of tension has been Iran's nuclear program. Israel and many Western countries fear that Iran could eventually develop nuclear weapons, something they believe would dramatically change the balance of power in the Middle East. Iran, on the other hand, insists that its nuclear program is peaceful and intended for energy and scientific development. Alongside the nuclear issue, Iran has expanded its influence across the region through alliances and partnerships with different groups and governments. This growing influence has made Israel increasingly concerned about its security and has strengthened the determination of the United States to counter Iran's regional power. Over the years, the conflict has largely remained indirect, involving cyber attacks, covert operations, economic sanctions, and proxy battles in other countries. However, today the situation appears to be shifting towards something much more direct and perilous. To understand whether this confrontation could grow into a larger war, we must first examine the events that triggered the current crisis and the motivations driving each side. For years, the Middle East has been a region where tension, rivalry, and geopolitical competition have shaped international politics. But every once in a while, events unfold that make the world stop and pay close attention. The confrontation involving Iran, Israel, and the United States is one of those moments. News of airstrikes, military alerts, and rising hostility has triggered fears that a much larger war could emerge. Many people are asking the same questions. Why are these countries confronting each other now? What are the deeper reasons behind the conflict? Is this about nuclear weapons, regional power, or something even more complex? No. The reality is that this situation did not appear suddenly. It is the result of decades of mistrust, competing interests, and security concerns that have been building slowly over time. When powerful nations feel threatened or believe their influence is at risk, tensions can escalate very quickly. In the case of Iran, Israel, and the United States, each country views the situation through a different lens. Israel believes it faces a serious long-term security challenge from Iran's military growth and regional alliances. Iran believes it is under constant pressure from foreign powers trying to weaken it and limit its influence. Meanwhile, the United States sees itself as responsible for maintaining stability in a region that has enormous strategic and economic importance. When these different perspectives collide, the result is a geopolitical struggle that affects far more than just the countries directly involved. In this documentary, we will examine how this conflict developed, the reasons each side presents to justify its actions, and the possible outcomes if tensions continue to rise. Understanding these events requires looking beyond headlines and exploring the deeper history and motivations shaping this dangerous confrontation. To truly understand the present crisis, we must look back at the history that shaped the relationships between these countries. Surprisingly, Iran and Israel were not always bitter rivals. Before 1979, the two nations had relatively cooperative relations. Iran, under the rule of the Shah, maintained diplomatic ties with Israel and shared certain strategic interests with Western nations. Trade, intelligence, cooperation, and quiet diplomatic engagement existed between the two states. However, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 changed the political landscape completely. The revolution replaced the monarchy with a new government that adopted a very different ideological outlook. The new leadership strongly opposed Israel's policies and openly supported groups that challenged Israeli influence in the region. This shift transformed what had once been cautious cooperation into deep political hostility. At the same time, Iran's relationship with the United States deteriorated dramatically. The seizure of the American embassy in Tehran and the hostage crisis created a deep and lasting divide between the two countries. Over the decades that followed, both sides developed a narrative of distrust. Washington accused Iran of supporting armed groups and destabilizing regional politics, while Iran accused the United States of interfering in Middle Eastern affairs and attempting to control regional power dynamics. These accusations created a cycle of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and strategic competition. Meanwhile, Israel grew increasingly concerned about Iran's expanding influence and military capabilities. What began as political disagreement slowly evolved into one of the most complex and dangerous rivalries in modern geopolitics. The latest escalation did not emerge from a single event, but from a series of developments that increased tensions to a breaking point. Military operations targeting key strategic locations inside Iran dramatically intensified the situation. These strikes reportedly focused on facilities connected to missile systems, command infrastructure, and military research. The goal, according to those supporting the operation, was to weaken capabilities that could threaten regional security. Such actions, however, immediately triggered a strong reaction from Iranian leaders. They condemned the strikes as violations of sovereignty and warned that retaliation would follow soon after. Reports began circulating about missile launches and drone activities targeting positions connected to opposing forces in the region. Each move created the risk of another response, forming a dangerous cycle of escalation. The situation quickly gained global attention because the Middle East plays a critical role in the world's energy supply and international trade routes. When tensions rise in this region, the effects can ripple across global markets. Oil prices often react quickly to uncertainty, and governments become concerned about the possibility of broader instability. Diplomatic channels soon became active as various countries urged restraint. However, when mistrust has been building for decades, even strong diplomatic pressure may not immediately reduce tensions. Both sides believe they are responding to threats, and that belief makes compromise far more difficult. From Israel's point of view, the confrontation with Iran is closely tied to concerns about national survival. Israeli leaders frequently emphasize that their country faces unique security challenges. Surrounded by regional tensions and past conflicts, Israel views potential threats very seriously. One of the biggest concerns repeatedly raised by Israeli officials is Iran's nuclear program. They argue that if Iran were ever to develop nuclear weapons, the strategic balance of power in the Middle East could change dramatically. Because Israel is a relatively small country geographically, leaders there often believe they cannot afford to wait until a threat becomes immediate before taking action. Another factor influencing Israel's policy is Iran's growing influence across the region. Through alliances and partnerships, Iran has built relationships with various groups and governments that sometimes oppose Israeli interests. Israeli officials argue that these alliances could eventually create multiple fronts of pressure against their country. From their perspective, limiting Iran's military capabilities is therefore a matter of long-term security planning. Supporters of Israel's position argue that proactive measures are necessary to prevent greater dangers in the future. Critics, however, believe such actions risk escalating tensions and making diplomatic solutions more difficult. Regardless of the debate, Israel's strategic calculations are shaped by a deep belief that preventing potential threats early is essential to protecting its citizens. The United States plays a significant role in this geopolitical equation as well. For decades, American policymakers have viewed the Middle East as a region of critical strategic importance. The presence of major energy resources, key shipping routes, and important political alliances make stability in the region a priority for Washington. Iran's military programs and regional ambitions have long been viewed by American leaders as potential challenges to that stability. In addition, the United States maintains one of its closest international partnerships with Israel. This alliance includes military cooperation, intelligence sharing, and strong diplomatic support. Because of this relationship, tensions involving Israel often draw American attention and involvement. Thus, leaders argue that protecting allies and preventing regional conflicts from expanding are key responsibilities. In maintaining global security, they also point to concerns about nuclear proliferation, stating that preventing the spread of nuclear weapons is a major international objective. However, American involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts has also been controversial. Critics argue that intervention can sometimes deepen tensions or create unintended consequences. Supporters respond that ignoring potential threats could allow dangerous situations to grow worse. These debates reflect the complicated balance the United States tries to maintain between strategic interests, international diplomacy, and regional stability. Iran, meanwhile, sees the situation from a very different perspective. Iranian leaders often argue that their country has faced decades of economic pressure, sanctions, and diplomatic isolation imposed by powerful nations. From their viewpoint, these actions are attempts to weaken Iran and prevent it from becoming a major regional power. Iranian officials insist that their nuclear program is intended for peaceful purposes, including energy production and scientific advancement. They argue that international inspections and agreements already provide mechanisms to ensure transparency. Another important theme in Iran's narrative is national sovereignty. Leaders frequently emphasize that foreign military strikes or threats represent violations of international law. In their view, responding to such actions is not aggression, but a legitimate defense of the country's independence. Iran also highlights its long history and strong national identity, arguing that external pressure only strengthens the determination of its population to resist foreign influence. Supporters of Iran's position say the country has the right to pursue development and protect its interests. Critics, however, believe Iran's regional alliances and military expansion contribute to instability and increase the risk of confrontation with neighboring states. These competing narratives make the conflict even more complicated because each side firmly believes its position is justified. As tensions continue to rise, one of the most important questions is how long such a conflict could last. Some analysts believe the confrontation might remain limited if diplomatic pressure quickly leads to negotiations. International organizations and global powers often attempt to mediate during crises, encouraging ceasefires or agreements that prevent further escalation. If successful, such efforts could reduce tensions within weeks or months. However, history shows that conflicts involving multiple powerful nations rarely resolve quickly. Another possibility is that the situation could expand into a wider regional conflict. The Middle East includes numerous alliances and rivalries, and several countries closely monitor developments involving Iran, Israel, and the United States. If additional actors become involved, the conflict could spread beyond its original scope. There is also the scenario of a prolonged strategic confrontation rather than an all-out war. In this case, tensions might continue through cyber operations, economic sanctions, intelligence activities, and occasional limited strikes. Such a situation could last for years without a clear resolution. The future will depend on political decisions, diplomatic negotiations, and the willingness of leaders to reduce tensions rather than escalate them further. Ultimately, the confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States reflects one of the most complex geopolitical rivalries of the modern era. Decades of history, ideological differences, security fears, and regional ambitions have all contributed to the current situation. Israel believes it must act decisively to prevent threats that could endanger its existence. The United States emphasizes its responsibility to protect allies and maintain stability in a strategically vital region. Iran insists it is defending its sovereignty and resisting external pressure from powerful nations. Each perspective contains its own logic and its own fears. When these viewpoints collide, the result is a dangerous standoff that can influence global politics and economic stability. The decisions made by leaders in the coming months will shape whether tensions decrease through diplomacy or intensify through further confrontation. History has shown that conflicts rooted in deep mistrust are difficult to resolve quickly. Yet the hope shared by many around the world is that dialogue, negotiation, and restraint will eventually prevail. The consequences of failure would not only affect the nations directly involved, but could reshape the entire region and impact millions of lives far beyond the battlefield. As we reach the end of this discussion, one thing becomes very clear. The confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States is not a simple conflict with an easy answer. It is the result of decades of political rivalry, security fears, ideological differences, and competing ambitions for influence in the Middle East. Each side believes it is acting in defense of its own national interests. Israel argues that it must prevent potential threats before they become dangerous realities. The United States claims it is working to protect its allies and maintain stability in a region that affects global security and energy markets. Iran, on the other hand, insists it is defending its sovereignty and resisting external pressure from powerful nations trying to limit its influence. The challenge is that when powerful countries hold such deeply opposing views, the risk of escalation becomes very real. Even a small military action or misunderstanding can trigger a chain reaction that leads to a much larger conflict. History has shown us many times that wars rarely stay limited once they begin. They often expand, pulling in allies, affecting global economies, causing suffering for ordinary people who have little control over political decisions. Another important question the world continues to ask is how long such tensions could last. Some conflicts fade quickly through diplomacy and negotiation, while others continue for years through indirect confrontations, sanctions, cyber operations, and political pressure. The future of this situation will depend largely on the choices made by leaders and whether dialogue can overcome mistrust. For viewers and global citizens, understanding these complex issues is extremely important. The more people understand the history, the motivations, and the risks behind such conflicts, the better they can evaluate the information they see in the news. Awareness encourages thoughtful discussion instead of fear or misinformation. If you found this documentary informative, make sure to like the video, share it with others, and subscribe to MARRYA'S documentary channel for more deep and thought-provoking documentaries that explain the biggest events shaping our world today.